the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. My guest today will not disappoint. He is the one and only and the legendary Jim Browne. Now, some of you outside of the country may well be asking, who's Jim Browne? Some of you won't. But he's definitely one of the personalities who has emerged on the faith scene, the Catholic faith scene in Ireland very much in the last 20 years. And this is, now he was going for a long time before that, but very much in the last 20 years, which is good because it's just about the time we needed him. So, Jim, you are so welcome to the conversation, and we're very grateful to you for being willing to be interviewed.
Thank you, Father Brendan.
Jim, could you tell us just a few things about your background, your childhood, and I suppose one of the things I'd be most interested in was just early glimmerings of faith. What the story was like in terms of faith for you when you were young.
It was exciting and painful. We got the loan of a car from the time I was 3, and I was brought to Knock, and that was the exciting bit. Painful was praying with Molly Brown, because she would start at one end of Westport.
Molly's your mother?
Yeah.
Yep.
And she'd have all these people and praying for them. And that end of it was fine on a warm day. But even Knock on a warm day, it was crispy. And in short trousers with purple knees, I thought I had the only spiritual knees in the world. My knees used to go purple with the cold. But the rosary was said every night. And it wasn't a happy house because my father was alcoholic.
Okay.
And a beautiful man went out to work every day. And nothing less than Satan himself arrived home. And I remember Christmas Day from the time I was 2. I remember Christmas Day, and I would have been 3 the following January, and going down into a cellar, pulling my father off a stool on a slab cold floor in his pajamas with a bottle of Guinness in one hand and a whiskey in the other, and my sister and mother upstairs crying because he was very violent when he drank. An absolute gentleman and very witty when he was sober, but that first drink was enough. And I always wanted to drink for the social side of it, but I always made a promise to myself that if I ever got violent, I'd stop drinking. And I wasn't violent in drink. The only damage I ever did was I thought I could sing. Okay. But when a row would start, I'd be the first one out the door. Whereas when I was sober, I'd stick my ground. Yeah. But I was so afraid of drink that I had to box it. And that box was watertight until I was probably 38. I was able to decide when I'd start drinking, yes, what time of the day I'd start.
Yes.
I never had that once I started.
Yes.
Hence the fact I always started at 9:30 at night. From 9:30 to midnight was my time. And then that time from 9:30 at night became 9:30 in the morning.
Yes.
And I broke every rule I ever made about if I ever drank. And I knew I tried to stop drinking in 1992 because my behavior was unacceptable to my wife. Yeah. And it didn't work because I was told I'd have to make the decision for myself. But a year later, my life was unacceptable to me, and I was the first person into Hope House in 1993 at the age of 38.
Okay, I just want to ask you a bit about Hope House, which is a very, very significant place in County Mayo in the west of Ireland, where Jim and I both live. Is it possible for you, looking back, to see your childhood outside of alcohol?
No.
Is it that much of a power?
Yeah. Because if there's any sickness, And it doesn't have to be alcoholism. But what happens a lot of the time is the whole focus is on the person that's sick.
Yeah.
And you're feeding the problem, especially with alcoholism. And instead of feeding the solution would be to acknowledge it. But my mother, God rest her, was reared into alcoholism. Her father was alcoholic. My father's father was alcoholic. I mean, they said it's hereditary. Sure, I couldn't have missed it.
Okay.
And alcohol controlled everything. You know, we couldn't have people in the house because of whatever state my father would come home in. And this wasn't that if he gave it up for a week or two, he drank every single day for 30-something years. Except for 2 weeks that he was in hospital, having 2/3 of his stomach removed. And I was told it was because he ate too many fries. And then the next thing, when he was okay, he had more fries. It was nothing to do with the fries. He drank very early in the day on an empty stomach.
Would you say that it was an unhappy childhood?
Absolutely terrible, yeah.
Ominous. Something always about to happen or possibly about to happen or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and the worst thing that happened was that I got two very similar words mixed up, even though they're very different. I confused intensity with intimacy.
Okay.
My life was intense. My mother was watching the clock. She was watching the gateway leading down into the housing estate. She was up and down the sitting room lighting candles and praying and looking out the window. And my father, ironically, was a bus driver.
Yes.
And I remember I used to have a great treat. I was allowed to meet the bus on a Tuesday night coming from bingo. And he'd often let me sit on his lap and drive the bus back in from the quay into Westport. And I was anything from 10 years of age at this stage, up until he'd let me drive it on my own. And I mean, if he was sober, he wouldn't even have tried that.
Yeah.
You know. But I remember them all coming out of the bus on the Tuesday night at the Mal River in Westport, and they were putting their rosary beads back into their bags and purses. And I said, Daddy, I thought you were on the bingo run today. And he says, we are, what's wrong with you? And I'm thinking, gee, I never knew people were praying coming from bingo. I could imagine them praying, going to bingo for a quick hit.
Yes.
But they were all, and Eileen Fergus.
They were terrified.
Terrified, yeah. And Eileen Fergus, our great neighbour, when both Mum and Dad died, she told me some of the stories of the amount of people that wanted to report them.
Yeah.
But nobody would have it on their conscience because my mother was very well known in Westport and she was a very loved woman.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But growing up, and then we were at the school in the Christian Brothers, and there was some teacher there who really should not be allowed to deal with children.
Okay.
And I hated it from the first minute I went in until the day my bag went down the river on the 23rd of June, 1972.
Go away.
And I stood at the bridge.
What age were you?
Oh, just done the leaving cert.
You're just on the leaving
cert. I had been expelled out of St. Nathan's College, who I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes, St. Nathan's, yeah.
Yeah. And I was sent there because it appeared I was the problem. Because
St. Nathan's was a boarding school.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
And it appeared that I was the problem because my results were so bad. And my mother thought that if I got away from the Lachicos in town, but sure, I was the Lachico. I mean, I often wondered what other fellas' mothers were calling me. And I was expelled out of St. Nathan's for drinking, smoking, and fighting. And I came back to Westport to finish my leaving cert.
The vices of a gentleman, one might have said, traditionally.
And I remember walking out of the school on the last day of the exam, and I mean, I was probably the only one that knew exactly the results that
Yes.
we're going to get. And I knew I had failed probably everything. And I went to the river, and my bag was there, and I says, Boston, are you ready for this? and into the river and straight out into the Atlantic Ocean. No regrets.
Tell me something, Jim. This experience you had. Now, you were in the Christian Brothers School for all your education, were you? Primary and secondary?
Up to intercert, up to 15,
Yeah.
and then I was sent to St. Nathan's for the last 2
gotcha.
years for my leaving cert.
Yeah. And that wasn't unusual, actually, because I was in St. Jarlath's, which was another boarding school, and I remember sometimes lads would come for the last 2 years. Yeah, that wasn't unusual. The Christian Brothers are a remarkable organisation, achieved great good in Ireland. It's very controversial. It would also have a dark side to it, to the teaching approaches. It wasn't just the brothers either. But they were an explicitly Catholic organisation. They were a religious order. Did it put you off the faith?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, now we're sucking diesel.
In actual fact, I'll just go back a bit. I was a total failure in everything, although I was a good footballer. And in the summer in Westport, there was great opportunities for summer work. And I wouldn't even go in and ask somebody to give me a job. I often thought, I'll go in and tell them I'll work for nothing. All I wanted to know was that someone wanted me. And that the neighbours would see me going up the town at 9 in the morning and they'd think that somebody wanted me. I had this, I don't know, is acknowledge the right word or feeling the right example, but I had this part of me that told me I was useless. And unfortunately, my father told me I was useless nearly every day. But my mother came down just after I did the intercert, and she said, that was when I was 15, and she said, you have a job selling ladies' shoes in Hughes's. And I loved it. And they loved me. And I sold 3 pairs of shoes to a woman that came in, and she was an awkward customer, not in her attitude, but she had feet like tennis rackets.
Okay.
And I just noticed she came in and everybody was gone off the floor.
Yes.
And it was
she had form.
It was like the OK Corral. There was only her and me. But the boss's sister walked in and she saw me selling this woman 3 pairs of shoes. And when she left the shop, she went up to her brother who ran the whole Carrick-Dunn, Charles Hughes empire. Yeah. And she said, there's a young fella down there. And she said, I never saw anybody to sell shoes like him. So when I had failed everything and become the greatest failure in Westport, that man sent for my mother. He said, Mrs. Browne, I want your son not just to come in here to our retail, but I want him to travel all over Ireland and represent Charles Hughes Limited all over Ireland. And I was earning £8 a week working in Castlebar in best stores. And my mother told me, and I'll never forget it, it was a Monday night, the first week in November 1973. And I said, what? See, I asked her to repeat it over and over and over because I couldn't believe that someone wanted me. And not just based on the fact that they heard about me, but based on what I had already done over 3 summers.
Based on their watching you, and experiencing you.
Yeah, and he said that the sales in the shop went up drastically during the summers and that I was a great salesman. And then when I was 19, he sent me up to the shop, where big menswear, ladies wear, and I got a new suit because at 19 he was sending me around Ireland.
Of course, and he wanted you to look the part.
Oh yeah, it was. And I got 4-inch platforms.
The 70s.
Yeah, and the flared trouser.
Yes.
And there was only one thing missing. The tinted glasses.
That's right. Oh, absolutely.
The silver square rims and the grey tint. And I went up into my mother's bedroom because she had a full-length mirror. And I looked, and you know, I was like something that a band had driven off without.
There we go.
And left me in the middle of Westport. But I got this Volkswagen van and I was told, there's Ireland. Drapery, footwear.
Okay, the lot.
Household,
the lot.
General drapery and footwear.
We should make the point at this point, just for our listeners who don't know the west of Ireland, is that Charles Hughes Limited, they would be very old, highly respected family business, still in business in Westport, a very well-known tourist town in Mayo. So to work for Hughes at that time was quite something.
It was even bigger when they came looking.
Yes.
For
to be recruited.
An 18-year-old failure.
Headhunted.
Yeah, and my mother said to him, she said, Mr. Hughes, I better tell you because you'll hear about it. Anyway, she said, James was expelled out of St. Nathan's.
Yeah.
He said, don't worry, Mrs. Browne, it's not an accountant I'm looking for. He's a salesman, and that's who I want.
Yes.
But going back to the question about the faith, and I remember going through Callan in County Kilkenny for the first time.
Yes.
And it was pouring. The wipers on the van were going, and I saw this statue dedicated to Edmund Ignatius Rice.
Yes, yes. The founder of the Christian Brothers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm awful sad to say this, but I did what I did. I climbed up on the statue and I spat into his face. Jeepers,
Jim. Somebody must have treated you very badly.
Yeah.
Because you're a gentleman. I mean, that they made you that angry. And they hurt you that much. That's a sad thing to hear.
And I apologise to that beautiful man because his whole idea was to educate young boys who hadn't a chance.
Oh, Rice the Saint. Yeah, Rice is a beautiful man.
And when
yeah.
I think of, and when I came back to my faith, I made it my business to get to a situation where I would apologise to him. And I suppose it's no different to what some people have done to Jesus as well, and what I've done to Jesus.
Okay.
I mean, when I criticise anybody, I say two things. I'm just as bad my way or there, but for the grace of God go
yes.
I. Because if that pain was unleashed
yeah.
in looking after children,
yeah.
or if I had become a father myself, and I often believe the reason that God never gave me kids, I could have done the same thing to them.
Yeah.
Because that rage was there until very recently.
And much later down, when all of the revelations came out about abuse in the church, were you surprised?
No.
You weren't?
No. In actual fact, the first time I saw it was on the Late Late Show, and there was a cardinal there, and he said to Gay Byrne, you know, Jesus said, suffer the little children. And I wasn't even into my faith. And I said, that fella knows exactly what. I couldn't sit and look at him. I mean, it wasn't his fault. I don't know what he did or didn't do. But I just knew that I was hurt by the kind of a question that he tried to answer.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he was able to answer it honestly.
Yeah.
And the very same time, another priest was in the audience and challenged him, but I only heard about it after that.
Oh, I remember that programme. That was Cardinal Daly.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I remember.
That was, I think, 1996.
It was about that.
But I had to get up and leave the sitting room.
You had to leave.
Yeah.
At what point did you start to come into your faith again? How did it happen? Because what you're describing there, I mean, that's a desert journey. All right, now the one oasis in it is you not only found, but you were found. You were called, as it were. You were found to have a tremendous talent. So that's one beautiful thing in that. But at the same time, that's a very hard journey. And yet, clearly at some point, you did discover the faith again. How did it happen?
It happened because there was no place left to go.
Okay. Rock bottom.
Further. Rock bottom, I met 7 years earlier in 1993. And I went into Hope House and I stopped drinking. And I was going to at least 5 AA meetings every week, sometimes 8, sometimes 9. I had a fantastic sponsor. I spent 6 out of that first 7 years in psychotherapy with 5 different counsellors. They all told me the same thing. They all told me why I was the way I was. They all had a name for it. They all talked about the inner child. They all had everything exactly perfect. But there wasn't one of them could do anything about it.
Those are the limitations of the approach. Yeah.
Plus the fact I had started my own business. I had become, I'd say, a millionaire in the first year.
You're joking.
Because of the gift, yeah.
Wow.
Because every customer in Ireland supported me. In actual fact, within a couple of months, I needed another guy. In 1990, that was 1990. In 1991, I was almost broke. And in 1992, I was unemployable. Because starting my own business allowed my alcoholism to run riot. And the saddest part about the whole thing, and I know I'm talking about myself, was that I married an absolutely wonderful girl. But I didn't know how to love her. And I'd buy her things, and I'd bring her flowers, and we'd go on holidays. And I remember one time I bought her a car, and she looked out the window and she started crying. And she said, "James, I don't want a car." She said, "I want you."
Yeah.
I hadn't a clue what she was talking about. I mean, for me to be in competition with a car of any description, I couldn't win. But yet I could, because it was me. But I didn't understand that language of intimacy.
Yes.
I thought the more you gave someone, the more the proof that you loved them. But it couldn't be further from the truth. And 6 years in full-time counselling with 5 different people. And a great sponsor and all these AA meetings. And the only thing that I was certain of was that I was getting sicker. Yeah. I knew that I had more cop on when I was having my last drink drunk than I had 7 years in recovery. Because there's a God in recovery that I wanted nothing to do with, because he was the God of my youth, who I wanted to get away from. And that wasn't bad enough, but then I got involved in satanic worship in relation to New Age practice.
How did that happen?
I got a birthday present from my wife for 3 reflexology sessions.
Okay.
And on the 3rd session, the woman never touched me, and she said she was doing Reiki, and that why wouldn't I get involved in this? And of course, I knew nothing about anything. I mean, after spending 20 years drinking, I didn't even know how to drink. So it was obvious that the world, I mean, I knew how to sell shoes, and that was about all I could ever say that I knew how to do. How to live, how to operate, I hadn't a clue. I really and truly, I mean, I was mapless, if that's any kind of a word. But I had no idea from the wide earthly world what any level of a functional family could even look like. I really hadn't a clue.
Yeah.
And I was trying to learn from AA and go and doing all of this stuff. And after 7 years, I knew that I was in trouble. And my wife was involved in it. And for a couple that very seldom ever argued, we couldn't even sit in the same room because we had invited the demons into our house, into our marriage, and into our hearts. And we were not even able to sit in the one room. And we didn't want to separate. And I went to live up near Swinford in a small cottage. And my wife and myself tried to put it back together and went out together like a courting couple. I'd come to the house and collect her, and I'd bring her out somewhere. Because you asked the question, could I have visualized my childhood without drink? I couldn't have visualized living without drink. Yeah. When Sister Attracta told me that I was a beautiful person and that she would be able to teach me how to live without drink.
This is Sister Attracta, the counsellor
in
Hope House.
Yeah.
In Hope House.
I said, but I don't want to live without drink. I said, I cannot imagine one day without, I mean, I drank every single day of my life.
Hope House is a highly respected rehabilitation institute in Foxford, outside Foxford, County Mayo.
Yeah. I mean, you said what grip had it on me as a child. That grip was there until the 14th of September 1993. And the only reason was because nothing worked. Everything had collapsed. But here I am, 7 years sober, and I'm worse than that point. The only bit of sense that I had was I was smart enough to spot it.
Yes.
I was smart enough to know how sick recovery had made me. It's a funny statement.
Yeah.
And I was living in a small cottage, and this beautiful man that I was renting it from, and he was also in AA, and he came down to his own house was literally only 10 yards from the cottage. The cottage is where he was born and reared, and he did it up and he rented it out, but I went up to take it for a long term. And he said, Jim, if you have no money to pay me, that's okay. He said, if you're not able to pay the electric, he said, that's okay. But I'm asking you one thing. He said, don't hang yourself in my barn. I don't want to be the one to cut you down.
Don't hang yourself in my barn.
Yeah.
There's a refreshing candour in that.
I mean, when you were talking about rock bottom, I was only halfway down.
You were only halfway
at that stage.
Yes.
So a competitor rang me, which was an unusual thing. And he said, Jim, I hear things are very bad. And I said, Donald, there couldn't be much worse. Well, he said, I was offered a range of children's shoes, and I know you have nothing. Will you come up to Loud, and I'll give you the agency. I have the contract signed and everything. All you have to do is take it. He said, I have enough. And I said, the car won't even make Loud. I mean, what kind of a shoe salesman covered in Ireland can't use his car to go up for an interview?
Yeah.
Is that rock bottom enough for you? Yeah. Or will I keep going?
No, it's impressive. Interesting though, am I right in saying you kept working the whole time?
I was, but I was making no money. I wasn't even surviving.
Wow, okay.
Because when I started on my own, I hit the bottom. I got some great shoe agencies. It wasn't my fault, but they went bankrupt, not because of me. And I was trying it again, and a beautiful man in Cork, he would have been one of Ireland's most insignificant wholesalers because he had no brands. It all became about brands. And he was a gentleman, and he asked me would I work for him. He heard that I wasn't going too good, but I mean, I had to get all that up and running, and it takes a long time in the shoe business to get credibility built up, especially from a man that's not even known. But I went up anyway to my friend Donald. He picked me up at the station in Dublin, and as I was walking to him, he just wiped his eyes, and I said, what happened, Jay? I said, the dust got me from the wind of the platform. So he brought me to his house in Cullen, and at 7 o'clock he said, it's Wednesday night. He said, Jim, we're going to Murphy's in Ardee. He was the most talented man I ever heard of in all my life. Yeah. But Donald said, we'll be going up at 7:30. Well, I said, you have a television in that room. I'll watch Coronation Street. But I sat down and I couldn't sit on the chair. Did you ever see a dog getting up and turning around and having to get up again?
Yes, indeed.
I was up and down on this couch, and I went out to Donald and I said, Donald, I don't know what kind of a couch that is, but I'll go up to Murphy's. And there was Murphy and his wife, and Donald and his wife, and me. And it came to the fifth glorious mystery, and they all looked at me to say it.
So this was a kind of prayer meeting, was it?
There was only 4.
Yeah.
Two men and their 2 wives.
Yeah.
And me.
Just saying the rosary
Just
together.
the rosary, that was it. Now, to go back to the first question in Knock, on St. Stephen's Day when I was 6, we were walking around the church, and I was cold, and I was hungry, and it was raining. And I says, Mammy, will you come home? I said, I'm frozen, I'm soaking, and I'm starving. I said, what are we doing up here? Don't we say the rosary at home every night? And my mother went down on the wet ground and she held me by the hips and she said, James Jean, I want you to meet the mother that I can never be. And I started crying. I thought she was going to leave us because she mysteriously went somewhere for a couple of months a few years before that. And I thought this was it. And I started crying. I said, Mammy, don't leave me. She said, I'm not leaving you, but I can't always be with you. And it was the day I heard the word consecrate. She said, consecrate your heart now to your other mother. And that's important because on the way back from that rosary, which was the first prayer I had said in 30 years, I heard the words, I want you to meet the mother that I can never be.
Yeah.
And I turned around and I asked Donald's wife, what was she saying? She said, I'm not saying anything. Well, I said, someone's talking. And I heard it again. And I really thought my heart would come out on top of the dashboard of the car.
Yeah.
And I could feel my eyes beginning to water.
Yeah.
And that was significant because I hadn't cried since the week I was expelled from boarding school. Because I was having my dinner, my father hit the back of my head and the fork went through my mouth. And I threw him around the kitchen like a toilet roll. And if I had hit him that night, I'd have killed him stone dead. And I sat out on the back doorstep and I cried and cried and I woke up sometime in the middle of the night freezing with the cold. And I could feel the tears had kind of almost frozen on my cheeks as well. They were nearly numb. And I never cried another drop.
This is years later.
I was 45.
Yes.
And I heard these words when I was 6. So
Yes.
the 39 years. And I hadn't cried for 30 years since the time I was at school,
Yes.
expelled.
Yes.
And I buried a load of my friends, and there was big men bawling their eyes out, and I'm thinking, you'd think they wouldn't be making a show of themselves.
Yeah.
Because I was beaten until I cried, and then I said, that's it, no one's going to make me ever cry again.
I get you.
So we got back into Donald's house, and he said, Jim, do you remember at the station, I was rubbing my eye, and I said, I do. Mm-hmm. He said, when I saw this withered, old, long-drawn face, he said, I didn't recognize you. And he says, you're 20 years younger than me, and I'm telling you, he said, you look 30 years older. And I want you to do me a favor. I'm giving you this range of shoes for nothing. I want no payment, nothing. But I want you to do something. And he took out the Divine Mercy leaflet. He said, I want you to do this on a Good Friday, which was going to be about 3 or 4 weeks' time. And I said, well, Donald, with all me giving out about the church, I said, I have never missed a Good Friday that I haven't gone to knock. And I'd walk up and I'd say, how are you, Jesus? They all think you're gone somewhere. I know you're around here. Thanks for last year.
Yeah.
And I'll see you next year.
Yeah.
And that was a whole year's prayer.
Yes.
And then I'd be wondering who's sitting on my bar stool now and how am I going to get in somewhere. But I brought me Divine Mercy novena to knock on Good Friday of the year 2000. And I didn't know they had built another church behind the old church.
That's right.
And where Molly went down was along the gable, my mother,
Yeah.
as we were walking. So I went inside.
That's the traditional circle. Yeah.
But I went inside the altar rails because I wanted to go down where my mother knelt with this new prayer. And I said started and somebody ran me. They told me I couldn't be in behind the altar. But it didn't matter. I had just gone in anyway.
Yeah.
I wanted to mark the spot where I consecrated myself to this woman.
Yes.
When I was on day 6, I was booked on my first trip to Medjugorje. So you asked me, how did that happen? You see, I've been asking the group here not to look at what happened today or yesterday, but when did it start?
Yes.
It started when I was 3.
Okay.
And I confirmed it when I was 6. I said, yes, Mary, I was brought here until I'm 6, and now on St. Stephen's Day, and I'm 6, I'm going to consecrate myself to you. Mm-hmm. That was it. And that's why I always say to parents who come here, don't give out to your kids. Don't give them a hard time.
Yeah.
Pray for them. That's when it happened. I know well when it happened. Yeah. I remember going around the church when I was 3. But I'll never forget the day when I was 6. And that was enough to bring me back every single year for years and since on Good Friday.
During which time, during those years, you weren't close to the church in any other way?
I wasn't going into the church, only once a year.
There you go. That's interesting. So it's like Our Lady kind of still had she still had a little cord tied around you.
Yeah, and I think what made it more profound was that I consecrated myself.
Yeah.
Which is what I asked mothers to do, to get their children and get them to consecrate themselves.
Yes.
I think that's a lot more powerful than just say, but you're consecrated, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I learned then ever since that in the New Testament that all the people who were healed, the initiative all came from them to go to Jesus.
Yes.
And I'd say that happened to me when I was 6.
So you had this experience of saying the rosary, which is a remarkable story, because it strikes me that she set you up and you go to Medjugorje. Now Medjugorje by then, that's 2000?
Yeah, 2000.
Medjugorje by then had been going for nearly 20 years. Was it 1981 or 2?
81, yeah.
81. Yeah. Drew you to Medjugorje?
There was no place to go.
No.
I went to a guy called Johnny McCarthy on Easter Monday.
Yep.
Because my friend John, that I was renting the house, said, Browne, he said, how was your back? I said, bad. He said, come on. He said, I'm going to a fella that prays with people. And I said, who is he? He said, he's a fella called Johnny McCarthy. So anyway, I was expecting Johnny to come out with a rosary beads. He came out with a Bible. I said, I want no Protestant praying over me. He says, I'm not a Protestant. I said, what are you doing with a Bible?
You were serious?
I was serious.
Serious, yeah.
But what Catholic did you ever see with a Bible?
Traditional Irish Catholic, yeah, to regard the Bible as Protestant.
I said, no Protestants go. I said, I'm bad enough. Besides a Protestant praying over me. So Johnny anyway prayed, and I didn't. My back never got one bit better, but something hit me here. Spiritual
healing. Johnny was a lovely man.
Terrific.
Johnny McCarthy just died, was a year ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, an absolutely lovely man, a great apostle for the Lord.
So I said to Johnny, I rang him up, I said, Johnny, I'm coming out to see you again next week. Well, he says, I won't be here. And I says, where will you be? He said, I'm going to Medjugorje. I says, I'll go with you.
Okay.
I rang Marian Pilgrimages all day the Tuesday after Easter. Phone was engaged.
Yeah.
I got through at 11 o'clock on the Wednesday morning. Tom Field answered the phone. And I said who I was. He said, I'm just after having a cancellation. She said, the phone's been so busy for the last 2 days. And he said, yeah, we'll bring you.
Marian Pilgrimages are very highly regarded pilgrimage tour operators. Organised pilgrimages to Medjugorje, but also several other...
Holy Land.
Yeah, the Holy Land, yeah.
So what was unique about that was also the timing, that I'm dealing with Marian Pilgrimages now for all of those 23 years, and Tom Field has never answered the phone again since.
What did you make of Medjugorje that first time?
It was the people that I had trouble with going over. I was at Shannon Airport.
Yes.
And there was a woman coming up fixing me. Now, this was 3 a.m, and I had hair, and she was saying, you're a lovely fella. And she says, this time next week, she says, you won't know yourself. And I'm thinking under my breath, this time tomorrow, you won't know yourself if you don't get out of my sight. And she was a lovely woman, but she was very strong. And she was sitting behind me in the plane. and she was telling me about all these miracles, and she was able to put her head in between the seats and look up.
Yes.
Now, I still don't know how she managed that.
That is quite an achievement.
And then she pushed me in the bus and sat in beside me, and she was telling me about more miracles. And I wanted to sleep, and she said, I'll tell you one more thing. And I said, okay, come on. She said, are you ready for it? And I said, I am. She said, I saw the sun spinning. I said, Mrs., I'm an alcoholic. I drank every day for 20 years. I said, have you any idea of all the things I saw spinning? But I got to Medjugorje. I went up onto the hill on my own, and I heard it again. I want you to meet the mother that I can never be, and confessions. And I was looking around, and
This is up on the hill.
on Apparition Hill,
Apparition Hill.
on the second joyful mystery, because I asked the guy to show me exactly where Our Lady stayed, because I said, I'm going home, because I can't spend a week with these people.
They were getting on your nerves.
Ah, well, they were all hugging everyone. That's right. The last time I saw that was New Year's Eve, and everybody was twisted.
Yes, yes.
Here you are, sober people, worse.
They hadn't even the excuse of being drunk.
Exactly, yeah. And I couldn't be around that level of love. It was okay when it was artificial, and I was part of the fraud.
Yeah,
I couldn't witness this hugging, genuine.
yeah.
But I came down off the hill anyway. This fella Kevin said, I know she appeared there because this is where the message, peace, 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 and only peace. Peace must reign between God and man and between all men. He said she gave that message there. So I stood there. I like the time in Knock. I had to stand exactly on the spot. I want you to meet the mother that I can never be, and confessions. Didn't say go to confessions, just and confessions.
Yeah.
So as I opened the door of the house, Father Michael Daly was standing in front of me. And I said, Father, I have to go home. Someone's dead and I need confessions. And he just said, come on. Brought me up to his bedroom. And every time I said something, I'd say, Father, we're wasting our time here. And I said, you have a load of people downstairs waiting for you. But I said, I've all this done already. I said, I've been in psychotherapy for 6 years. I said, I've done all this. I have a sponsor. He knows everything. And I said, all I'm doing is telling you. But he was the loveliest gentleman and gentleman. He was both. Yes. A gentleman and a gentleman. And he said, this is important. Keep going. And after a few hours, he said, we'll have a break for a cup of tea. And we had a cup of tea and went back. And then it happened. He said, all those sins are forgiven. I said, that's what's wrong. All my psychotherapy, all my thousands, all my new age, all my healing the inner child, all the psychotherapists, my sponsors, all the AA meetings, and all I needed was one word, forgiven. And everything changed with one word. And there's only one man that can say that, and that's you and Jesus Christ on this earth. That's what did it. A human being that I would have had no time for was the person that told me with one word what it was all about. One word. The sham, the fraud, looking for help from people who couldn't help themselves. It's all over, and I knew it. I knew this was the beginning of the greatest time in my life.
What age were you?
45. And knowing it was even better than having to find it out at a later stage. I knew it instantly.
That you were forgiven?
No, that I knew this was day one.
I'm sorry to have the bad taste to push further on this, but I don't get paid for having good taste. I have to ask, did you at that time have a sense of mission? Or
No.
did it come shortly afterwards? Did it take quite a while?
I pushed mission. I pushed it, believe it or believe it not. The following morning at Mass, I couldn't wait to get down to Mass. I'm telling you, the 3rd of May of the year 2000, I ran down to St. James's Church. Jumping.
Go away.
I was jumping. I mean, I knew this was day one. I knew it. Yeah, I was jumping. And the sun was shining and I was jumping and jumping. I was saying hello to everyone. I didn't care whether they liked me or thought I was drunk again. And I went into the church and the priest said, before you shake the people's hand with a sign of peace, he said, you have to forgive those who have hurt you. Well, the tears were, I won't say falling on the seat, they were hopping off the seat. And it was the most amazing thing. Do you know the old projectors that they were like a magazine of a gun and they'd slide around and you'd get a shot?
That's right.
And the next one would come around and you'd see all these images.
Yeah.
And Jesus showed me all the times of joy,
Yeah.
all the times of happiness, all the times of love, and all the times of laughter in my childhood that I never knew existed. And there was Mass for my mother and father 1 month before this day. And my sister from Meath booked the Mass because I wasn't going to church, like. And she said, will you go to Mass for your mum and dad? And I said, no way. And I didn't realize that I resented my mother as well because I had asked her for help many times. And when I was 6, and it was an awful day and an awful thing to do to a child, I was moved in to the bedroom with my father. And if I only had to deal with the smell that was in that room, regardless of the beatings and not being able to sleep, it would have been too much. And this resentment I had against my mother because I begged her to take me out. And I knew that she couldn't because I remember the beating she got on Christmas Day when I was 2. And that was nothing new or isolated. That was regularly, but that never left my mind. And I remember saying to Jesus, I said, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go to Mum and Dad and tell them that I love them. And thanks for giving them to me. But I said, I don't like what happened, and I don't like the fact that you let it happen. But I'll ask you one thing, Jesus, please, don't waste it. Whatever you think now that I can do, I'll do it, because I'm out. I'm starting day one, a new day, a new life, and now I'm doing one thing that I never did, regardless of AA, step 3. To turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I said, that's you now, Jesus, from this minute on. I'm giving you everything. And I see people doing it all the time when they have stuff they don't want, hand it over. Look, you know, and that I treated God like a skip, throwing out whatever I didn't want. I don't ever hear people saying, well, I handed over 10% of my income to my church. Yeah. And that day, on that kneeler with my tears dripping down, I said to Jesus, I'm going to turn my entire will and all of my life over to you because, Jesus, I made a dog's dinner out of it. And I'll give you a chance now to make a better job out of it. Yeah. The greatest gift that God gave me was allowing myself to become the greatest failure I ever knew, and allowed me to recognize that I did all that on my own. And for the first time in my life, I had no one to blame. I saw the results. And on that same day, I said, okay, Jesus, I'm turning my entire will and my life into your care today, 3rd of May, the year 2000. That's when this 3rd step of Alcoholics Anonymous came to life, because I was giving Jesus everything, good, bad, indifferent, ugly. And I said, when I start to make a few bob, I won't forget you.
This had an effect on your professional work, on your business work.
Everything that could go right started to go right.
Wow.
And I was praying then to St. Anthony, who I had taken for confirmation, but I had sidelined him.
You took that as your confirmation name, Anthony, yeah.
Because he was the undoubted proof that there was a God for a lot of my life. But again, like the handing over rubbish, I only went to him when I was lost something. Yeah. But then I said to him, I said, St. Anthony, when I made a few bob, I gave him a few bob, and I said, I want to thank you for that because you found the greatest thing of all. You found me, Jesus.
Yes.
I said, I thought you were all about car keys and invoices and the fiver, I didn't know where I put it. Now I know what your job is. You found me, Jesus.
Mission?
Mission was open. For the first time ever, I decided I didn't know what was next. And the freedom that came with that, not having a plan. Because anybody that comes from an alcoholic house becomes alcoholic and learns to negotiate and navigate a life with that level of insanity needs a plan. And this day on the 3rd of May, I said to Jesus, I don't have a plan. I'm willing to go with your one this time. He allowed me the grace and the honor of total failure handling my own life. And again, he didn't blame me, and I didn't blame myself. I just acknowledged it. And I saw where Joshua did the same thing when he went into the city of Ai after defeating and pulling the walls of Jericho down, and he went into this small city and he only sent in 3,000 men because it was such a cakewalk, and he was defeated. And just like Joshua's defeat, and God brought him back into that same place again, God brought me back into the very same places, and this time I had a victory in everything I touched because I had Jesus Christ went in before me. And everything that could go right came right. I got this new brand of slippers. I didn't want to take it, but I took it because it wasn't much. I had nothing else, and it became a huge product in the Irish marketplace. Then the same guy launched a brand called Heavenly Feet. I came out here to give somebody a helping hand one day, and there was a for sale sign in the garden. At that stage, the only amount of money that I could get from any bank or building society, and now this was in 2001, and all they'd give me was 15,000. I mean, they were giving more to school kids. But my failure was in the banks. I barely paid off what I had. I was zeroed, and they never wanted nothing to do with me. And I told the man that owned this house, because he couldn't sell it for 6 months because he was building another house. And by the time his other house was finished, I had shaken his hand here. Do you know why? There was a picture of St. Anthony over the kitchen. And I had no money, and I said, I'll buy your house, because I said to St. Anthony, find me a house. And anyone that can find Jesus can find a house for you.
Yeah. We're in the village, it's a very beautiful village of Kilcoyne on the west coast of Mayo, and we're in Jim's home, and actually in a part that he is a magnificent addition that he's just put onto his home for his work, but more of that later. So you bought the house?
I bought the house. I moved in the following summer, 2002, and I was at a shoe show in England, and they asked me would I take on a new product, and I made 200,000 that I didn't even need. But if I can go back to earlier in February of 2002, we had a retail shop in Westport, and we had a closing down sale, and I helped my wife to deal with all our creditors, but we only could pay them half. And I got into a bit of difficulty because I was in the trade all my life, and yet most of them knew I was legitimate, and I had nothing to do with the retail shop except I invested money in it. My wife did it. I was out on the road, and I was at Mass in Tralee, and there was a priest talking about an eye for an eye. And he said, if you borrow £100, he said, you're not entitled to give back 50. And likewise, he said, if you give somebody 50, you're not entitled to charge them 100. And I'm thinking, I only paid all of these people half, and I still owe thousands. And I was so upset that I left Kerry and drove home that night, 10 o'clock at night. And I rang the suppliers, and they only took, one guy took another 500. And I heard God saying, that's when I start multiplying. And I need it, because I was about to do the deal for this house. And here I was prepared to give whatever money, because to clean up the past. And boy, did Jesus tell me what he does with honest money. Then that August, I got this shoe agency. I made 200,000 that I didn't need. I left here and I went back to the little cottage in Swinford, and I put up 5 ensuite bedrooms, because I knew one thing, that this house did not belong to me. Again, I'm not the smartest, but I'm smart enough to know when it's God that's talking.
Yes.
And I knew that this place was never, ever going to be for me alone, because me alone couldn't have bought it. Priests started coming, friends started coming. We started having little prayer meetings, rosaries. The guides from Medjugorje arrived in it. So then I decided I'd extend it a bit, and then I put on a small prayer room at the back. And then more things started to happen. And then the row started. Jesus and myself had an awful plunder one morning. I had this Bible that was given to me as a present by a man called Pascal Delaney. Himself and his wife were in prayer ministry in St. Catherine's in Maynooth with the likes of Breda Laffey and Joe Kennedy. Yes. And they were there as well. And Pascal prayed with me, and he said, Jesus is telling me to give you this Bible. And I said, well, I'll tell you one thing, if Jesus ever made a mistake, I said it today. And he said, this will be the most read Bible in this country. And I couldn't, and I'd be reading it, and I wouldn't even be able to retain it. And I came across Luke chapter 24, verse 45, that Jesus opened the minds of his disciples so that they could understand the scripture. And I remember cocking my head out saying, okay, Jesus, hit it. And nothing happened. He said, you want to read that again, James? And I read it again. He said, you're not a disciple. He said, my disciples gave up everything and followed me. He says, you've given up nothing. No, he said, you've pushed me in here a bit and you put me in there a bit and you did a bit over here, but you haven't actually given up anything. And at the time I was earning between 300,000 and 400,000 a year. I said, where were you when I was broke? When I'd have no difficulty making this decision? Yes. I got no answer. I knew the answer. That I was brought up to a level where it was probably the biggest decision now of my life, because Jesus showed me what I was doing in the world and what he wanted. And he had to bring me up to that level of an income in order for me to decide, is Jesus real or is 400,000 a year real? And I threw the Bible on the ground and I said, I'm going for my porridge. I said, I don't know will I be back. And I came back the following morning. I said, okay, Jesus. He said to me, you're dealing with the wrong souls. No more shoes. He said, these are the souls I need you to work with. And that was the day I made the decision to pull out completely. I had a leg each side. Going back to always being insecure. I love you, Jesus, but I need this. I love you, Jesus, but look at I'm doing well here. Jesus said, it's me or nothing.
I understand.
He said, it's not what you give, it's what you give up. I was as sick as a pig for a couple of days.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, I was as sick as a pig.
In the world we're living in, like that in itself is a fairy tale ending. You know, is you had come through the bad times and you were making 400,000 a year. Like that's the fairy tale ending.
Yeah.
You've made it the American dream. And the American dream has become the Irish dream, insofar as it wasn't always. And you've made it. And you discovered that was only the start.
Yeah.
That he was, in a sense, he was setting you up again.
Yeah.
It's a lot to hand over.
But I never forgot the kneeler in Medjugorje when I said to Jesus, I give you my will and my life. Yeah. That included 400 grand. But I wasn't happy with his timing.
He's a bit like the restaurants used to be in Ireland before they made them put the prices up outside. you were never sure what was going to come. Yeah, that's remarkable. Could I ask you something, Jim? You were obviously a gifted salesman, and you've been proven to be no less gifted in terms of serving God. Do you see a connection in terms of the skills, in terms of, do you see your time as a businessman and a salesman as being partly a preparation for this? Is that possible?
Yeah, and I see one great gift, and it's the complete reverse to what people thought. When I was a salesman and a well-recognised salesman, and I mean, I was headhunted by Hughes. I was also headhunted by Sunbeam in Cork, a company in Dublin, and then Dubarry headhunted me in 1984 when I was only 29. So my ability was spotted, and I was probably the only one that didn't know I had it, by the way, because this awful, you know, I was like an Easter egg, big flowery box, big car, staying in the best hotels. But no matter what kind of an Easter egg you get, there's nothing in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And that was me. I looked good on the outside, but this uselessness was still there.
Yeah.
And the tapes going round in my head. And one teacher used to make me bray like a donkey in the classroom.
Oh, dear God.
And then make me march up and down so that the whole school would know the donkey came. Now, that wasn't easy. And I'd be hoping that my mother wouldn't get wind of it, or some of the girls that I would have liked in the town wouldn't have heard it. That's the last thing I wanted as a nickname, was to be called the donkey.
Yes.
You know. But they all said, Alger, Jim, you're no wonder you're a great salesman, you have the gift of the gab. And believe it or not, it was the opposite. I had the ability to listen.
And would you regard that as crucial to your success as a salesman?
I believe that that's crucial for every human being on the planet to be listened to.
Yeah.
People have to pay to be listened to.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
People have to fork out a weekly donation or a weekly thing to a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist only to be listened to, because they do not have the solution.
I've heard doctors say that half their time is spent just listening to patients.
Yeah, and the one thing, I used to listen to my shopkeepers. And I listened to them because, believe it or not, I loved most of them. because they were the shoe business was always a very difficult trade because it was seasonal as well as everything else. And you know, the shoe shop would be full of sandals in February, March, April, May, and the weather pouring down, and then they'd put them off in the sale, and then there'd be a heat wave.
It must be a nightmare. Irish weather is so unpredictable.
Oh yeah, and you know, fashion isn't dictated by weather, but shoes are. You have to separate the fashion element from the product.
Yes.
I mean, they were wearing Ugg boots on the beaches in Australia, fur-lined boots on beaches.
Yeah.
You know, so fashion makes no sense, but product does. And there is a winter and a summer, and our seasons have been all over the place. But what I found was listening to shopkeepers put me on a different level with them. And listening to people who come here. And the one common denominator that God has used is He has allowed me to be able to listen. It's not the gift of the gab that's important. It's the gift to be able to listen, like you, like a priest in confession.
That's very, very interesting.
And the people don't know it, that the greatest gift is there on a plate. And you know who told me this? A good old Protestant in Medjugorje. She says to me, "What religion are you?" I said, "What?" She says, "I'm a Protestant." She says, "Do you realize what you have?" And I said, "How do you mean?" She said, "To go in to confessions to a priest and to sit there and then him tell you that all your sins are forgiven. And you can talk and talk to him. And it's not about your sins, it's about everything. And it's often the person that's on the outside that can really spot the problems on the inside." And I'll never forget what that woman said to me. And that's the greatest free gift in the Catholic Church, are people like you who give up of your time, your day, if you have a hobby, probably seldom at this stage. And the greatest gift is there is somebody, not just can listen, but can tell you then your sins are forgiven. I mean, it's the greatest gift of all, is the listening priest that can then give absolution. But God has used my ability. I'm good to organize things. And your mother, and I have to say it because I used to give her a big batch of envelopes, and I'd have cork in a plastic band, and she'd post them all on the Wednesday. And I mightn't get back for a few weeks, but the following week she'd have Limerick and Tralee, and she'd have it, and she'd post them for me.
I'm from this village originally, and my mother for 40 years was the postmistress here, and still lives here.
So I never paid her, but I give you another cup of tea. But I think she got a great kick out of being part of that, what I was doing. Because I told her that I really don't even get out of it. I used to have these exhibitions. I go into a hotel and I wouldn't be outside of the hotel for 7 solid days. Because the shopkeepers, I'd go into the Imperial in Cork, and the shopkeepers would come in by appointment.
Yes.
From Youghal, Middleton, Cove, Cork City, then Bandon, Clonakilty, Skibbereen, Castletownbere, then the North Cork, Kanturk, Newmarket, Mallow, and Cork is a big place.
Yes.
And I'd have all the appointments made, and what your mother was posting out was the confirmation of all those appointments.
Yeah.
And she always landed them there, and I always knew she did her job because the shopkeeper, "Jim, yeah, that's grand." I said, "Thanks, Bernie."
How did your new mission start to become apparent to you? How did the Lord show you what He wanted you to do?
He wanted me to bring fellas like myself who couldn't cry, who didn't believe in God, and were trying to struggle with white knuckles, holding on at AA meetings. And I brought one. And there was no doubt that God, there was 3 things that God showed me. He said, "I want you to bring people like yourself, people who can't cry, who don't know God, and who are trying to survive on a 12-step program where God does not exist. He said, I want you to bring parents who have buried their babies. And I want you to bring families who are not able to afford to go to Medjugorje as a family. And then he said to me, if you bring a woman, she'll save herself. If you bring a father, he'll save the family. And if you bring a priest, he'll save the parish. I mean, Jesus doesn't hang around with big sermons, and I got it like that. And they were the people I started to bring. And I brought one, and then I brought two, and then I brought three, and then I brought Paddy. And I said to Jesus, okay, Jesus, if you can sort out Paddy, I'll fill a plane. And I thought that's a plane that would never have to take off the ground, because if there was a worse drinker than me, it was Paddy. And
he was lower than rock bottom.
I mean, I met him coming up.
Heading with considerable speed. I
mean, Paddy was so far down, I think it was the loneliness that got him. And I said, okay, Jesus, sort Paddy, and I'll fill a plane. I brought Paddy, and Paddy never needed to drink again. So Paddy said, I want to bring my wife and my 5 kids, and you know one of the kids, and you might even know the story. And I said, I'll bring your wife and 4 kids. I'm not bringing Keith, your eldest son. And he said, why won't you bring Keith? Because I said, Paddy, when that boy goes into Westport, your phone call comes from the police station to come in and take this fellow home. And I said, what am I going to do with a guy like that in Medjugorje? And Paddy started crying. He said, but Jim, he's my son. And whatever those words, and they do the same thing today. He's my son. Yeah. The morning we were leaving Knock Airport, I had to bring this 18-year-old 3 times out of the bar, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock in the morning.
Jeepers, he was dedicated.
I knew that type of dedication, but I knew where...
You recognised it.
I sure did, yeah. But again, I wasn't as bad as him, because I was 38 when I was doing that, you see? Mm-hmm. But I saw him going to confessions, and I saw the most incredible act, that here's this guy involved with all kinds of drug and alcoholism, and he gets up out of his seat and he goes over to the door, and he just didn't point over to his seat. He walked this woman back to his seat, and he stood over at the door. And when we came home from Medjugorje, he gave me a call and he says, Jim, you know now I'm working with my dad. I didn't talk to him for nearly 12 years. But he said, I'm working now with him. You know where we are at the football field? And I said, yeah. He said, come down. And he said, here's 600. He said, I'm going back to Medjugorje again. And he says, here's 700. It's everything I've saved, but you have to get a guy like me. And that rang a bell, because that's what Jesus told me to get, was people like myself as well. And I brought that man to Medjugorje. And then he rang me to ask me to teach him how to bring a group, and he brought 50 youngsters. And the following year, when he was 20, the same. And then he was 21, and I was invited to his house, and I thought it was his 21st, so I put an extra 50 euro in my pocket. And Veronica, his mother, says, no, he's joining the priesthood. That, with the day I was 6, are the 2 most outstanding days in my life, where Jesus told me to mind my own business. He said, look what we did for you. Did you think that this boy was out of our range? And I'll tell you one thing, I never had manners put on me like Jesus did on his mother that day.
I should mention that I know Keith Kelly very well, the young man that Jim is talking about, and I've worked with him. He was in ministry in my parish for 3 years, and he's an absolutely outstanding and godly young man. Yeah. Yeah, wonderful guy. That's an amazing story.
But the way he evangelized without even opening his mouth, I was coming out of the church in Westport, and a woman, I could hear her running behind me, and I knew I was in trouble. You probably know the high heel, when it gets caught in the ground, there's a woman running, and they go, along the ground. It's time to let her catch up. And she says, Jim Browne, she says, I never believed in Medjugorje. And she says, I even spoke against it. And she said, I even spoke against you. And I said, I know well you did. She says, today I know it's real. And I said, what happened? She says, both of my sons are below in bed. And Keith Kelly is in there at Mass. And I heard you brought him to Medjugorje. It must be true. He never opened his mouth. The beauty of silence. And again, it's like what I was saying about putting my foot into the water. Action is the key for everything. Action. You know, there's only 2 women from the Old Testament made their way into the hall of faith. Abraham's wife and Rahab the prostitute.
There you go.
It wasn't because of all the prayers they said. It was what they did. And if a prostitute can make it, an alcoholic might have a chance too.
Fair enough. Weren't the Pharisees warned that the tax collectors and the prostitutes were getting in ahead of them?
Yeah, did he mention alcoholics?
Well, I'm sure some of them might have been alcoholics too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, we could talk all day. Could I just ask you, because I suspect we'll have to do this again. There's just too much there to leave alone. What's your take on the present state of the church?
It's the most painful, but also the most powerful time in the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
It's like me with the job. Am I in or out? I think this is a great opportunity for people in the middle to make a decision. I don't want it, or I do want it, and I'm going to up my game. I'm going to show that I'm a Catholic. I'm not just going to talk about it. And I think the Catholic that's there at the minute has become rock solid because he has had to. Because the only times that we were defeated in Westport in a football game was when we went out to play a team and we were certain we'd beat them and we got hammered.
Yeah.
And I played a lot of singular sports. I played a lot of handball. I played a lot of table tennis. And I only played my best against the best player. I fiddled around with a guy that I knew I could beat. I cannot beat what's happening today at my normal rate of play. I have to play my best now. Yeah, I love the way you're trying to smile and hold back at the same time. I have to play my best because of the opposition that I'm against. I have to. And that's what God is allowing me to do. He's allowing me to up my game, to allow me to up my faith. He's allowing me now to become what He created me to be.
We believe the church is indefectible. The church will last as long as history. But we've no guarantee it'll last in any particular country for that time. Will the faith survive in Ireland?
The church is in the heart. The church is no longer a building. The church is in here. I'm church, or I'm not church. Nobody can take away my faith without my full cooperation. And God gave me an opportunity to prove which side I was on again over the last 3 years. Do you trust me, or are you going with a general thinking? Mm-hmm. There's nothing general anymore. Each person has to know, and that's why Jesus was telling me, that's why when He said in the Bible, you know, destroy this temple and I'll build it back in 3 days. And they wanted a sign. The sign is that I don't get it with what I think is written there. I only get it when I go down into this word and explore it at a deeper level than my mind is capable of understanding it. And God gave me that great gift to show that I was more than I thought I was. And that my life has become more than I thought it ever could be. And he has allowed me, like his word, to know things that I couldn't know. It's like last week I was giving the people here a teaching about when Jesus met Nathaniel. And everybody thought that Nathaniel was putting down Nazareth.
Yeah.
And really, Nathaniel knew a scripture. And he knew that no Messiah was going to come out of Nazareth. And when he says, can any good come out of there? He knew that the Savior of the world was coming out of Bethlehem. But people think, well, can any good come out of Mayo?
I know.
And it's used as a put down. And when Jesus said, I saw you under the fig tree, that was a common way of describing a person who was sitting with their Bible. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but Jesus told them that he was reading Genesis 28, verse 12, where he talked about the angels ascending and descending to heaven. Because again, when I read that, and he said to Nathaniel, truly I say to you, you will see the angels ascending and descending. And he was telling Nathaniel what he was reading the last time he was with him. Genesis 28, verse 12. And that's far beyond the guy whose bag went down the river. Yes. I'll tell you. I nearly expect to see the bag coming back up when I get into the scripture. And you see, because I was told I was unteachable. And the other awful thing was that I needed glasses since I was a year old. Yeah. And I didn't get them until I was 12. And at that stage, it was established that I was unteachable. And I thought, and unlovable. So what has a guy with that background only to meet Jesus Christ?
As we finish, Jim, I'm being a bit selfish here. Do you have anything to say to the priesthood?
Keep going.
Keep plugging.
We need you. You're needed more than ever. And it's a great time to be a priest, no more than it's a great time to be here, because this will test. This will do the testing. Am I in or out?
Yeah.
The only thing is, I know one thing for certain. I can never make it on my own, and neither can you.
That's right.
And if anyone says, I'm not able or I can't, that's true. I have the greatest essay of all time that I ever wrote. There was one, we were asked to write about a day in the bog, and I wrote, it rained, we didn't go. And my greatest 6-word essay today is, I can't. Jesus can, let him.
Yes.
6 words. That is my entire future and yours.
And on that note, Jim, I think we'll both throw our books in the river. Jim Browne, a privilege and a pleasure.
God bless you.